Hello and welcome to our webinar, What's New in VMware Cloud Foundation. This event is produced in partnership with VMware. Thank you so much for joining us on the webinar. This is going to be a lot of fun, maybe a little bit different from some of our traditional webinars because this is all about learning about the VMware Cloud Foundation suite, what makes it up, what makes it cool, and how it can help you. And we're going to be walking through all of that step by step. It's not a bunch of slides, it's a walkthrough. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. We want this to be an educational event, and we encourage your questions there in the questions pane. We'll be doing a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation today, so keep your questions coming. We also have a best question prize, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. Before I do that, I want to call your attention there to the Handouts tab. If you use that link right there at the top of the Handouts tab, you can follow along with what we're doing in the VMware Tech Zone. So make sure that you check that out, as well as the other resources that are available for download there for additional information. And then finally, at the end of the webinar, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. If you're watching this on demand, of course, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found right there in your Handouts tab. And then, as I mentioned, we have our best question prize as well. This is for a $50 Amazon gift card, and we'll be selecting that prize winner after the event. Of course, you have to ask a question to be entered into the best question prize drawing, and also meet our Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. So if you have a question on your mind, you're thinking about, hey, does VMware Cloud Foundation do this or that, or how does it work with this? Feel free to ask those questions and be entered into this prize drawing as a result. So with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar. I'm excited to introduce you to our expert presenter. Welcome, Mr. Kyle Gleed, Staff Technical Marketing Architect in the Cloud Platform Business Unit, specifically on VMware Cloud Foundation. Kyle, it's great to have you on. Thank you so much for joining. Take it away.
Foundation technical marketing team at VMware, and in the next hour or so I'm going to introduce you to VMware Cloud Foundation, and we'll talk about how Cloud Foundation is enabling IT folks throughout our customers to basically enable a modern private cloud and how they can tie that private cloud up to their public cloud to enable this true hybrid cloud. And so with that, we'll jump right in. I got about 10, 15 minutes of slides just to make sure we understand what Cloud Foundation is, what it means when we talk about cloud and private cloud and hybrid cloud, and how we at VMware feel the Cloud Foundation is really the best solution to help you achieve that vision of a modern hybrid cloud. And then we're going to switch over to our VMware Cloud Foundation Tech Zone, where I'll introduce you to some resources we have where you can get some interactive demos where you can learn more and get more experience with actually using Cloud Foundation and kind of get started. So with that, let's jump in. So let's start with a scenario here. I like to just kind of relate this back to the people who are sitting at the desk who are responsible for managing these vSphere environments. And let's just say you're back from lunch and your boss has just stopped you in the hallway and said, hey, you know, we have a team of developers. They're ready to start work on Monday. I need you to get those servers that we racked up earlier this week ready to go in a vSphere environment so they can start doing some work. And for this example, let's assume that that work is going to involve maybe doing some Kubernetes development on top of a vSphere cluster using vSphere 7. So you think about this request, and it's pretty standard. You know, just bosses come and said, hey, I need you to build a vSphere cluster. So my question to you is, how much time do you need? How long will this take? It's Friday afternoon. Let's say you have plans on Saturday, Sunday. You really don't want to spend your weekend in the office getting this ready, but these developers are coming on Monday. The boss is anxious to go. So is this something you can do in a couple of hours? And to answer that question, you know, everybody's going to be different. Some people will be like, oh yeah, I can knock that out real quickly. Other people are going to be like, well, hold on a sec. You know, what does this ask really entail? Because what is really being asked for here is, okay, I'm gonna have to go out and get to deploy a vCenter server. I'm gonna have to add some hosts into that inventory, create a cluster, maybe create a virtual distributed switch, migrate the VMs over. If I'm doing Kubernetes, I'm gonna need NSX potentially. So I need to create an edge cluster. I need to go in and maybe talk to the network guys about getting some IP addresses. That might require some help desk tickets, which might require talking to the storage guys, the same thing. And so all of a sudden, this simple request kind of has ballooned a little bit. And so something that, from the boss's perspective, he's thinking a couple of hours, and you started thinking, oh, maybe I can get this done in a week. And then all of a sudden you're starting to think, maybe I can get this done in a day. Then all of a sudden you're starting to think, man, this could take a week or longer. And so this is kind of the challenge. I just kind of want to get you thinking about. Obviously, this is kind of a made up hypothetical, and everybody's different, and maybe your experience might be a little bit different than the next guy. But the point here is that as IT teams, we get these types of requests, and these requests come in, and we just don't get one request. We get 5, 6, many requests coming at us all at the same time. And so as these lines of business, as these people are coming to us asking for things, and we look at what the load is on the IT operations team, it's often very hard to manage within the data center. And that's because our data centers are built on an old paradigm, an old model, based largely on help desk tickets and silos. And if you need infrastructure, you start out by submitting a ticket. That ticket then gets forwarded to somebody who then goes out and requests networking information. Maybe there's some switch configuration, some IP addresses, some VLANs need to be allocated. We have to go out and configure storage. And all these tickets, all this passing back and forth, working between teams, just kind of leads to this inefficient operation where it takes a long time to do things. Okay, so if we sit down and think, okay, how do we address this? How do we make the data center operate like a cloud? And when I mean operate like a cloud, I mean, how do we make it so that we use automation to automatically provision things? We can provision things quickly. If requests come in and say, hey, you provisioned 4, I now want 5, be able to respond to that very dynamically, very efficiently. How do we take the data center and give it that cloud-like operating model? And the way we do that is by addressing some of these challenges. So if we look at the data center and that scenario I laid out, here's a number of challenges here out there that we're going to summarize here. So time, it takes a long time to do things. Complexity, there's a lot of components involved. The cost in terms of being able to efficiently utilize infrastructure and not have to always go out and buy new servers every time you need a new workload. And then with the public cloud out there, how do we maintain compliance and security? And so there's a lot of reasons why these are problems. I already mentioned the help desk tickets, the passing back and forth, the working across silos, a lack of standardization. How many of you have multiple vSphere clusters? And of those multiple vSphere clusters, how many of them are configured exactly the same? Most likely, they're all a little bit different. One may be using a VDS, one may be using a standard switch, one may be using NSX, one may be using VSAN, the other may be using NFS storage. They're all going to be different in different ways and have different configurations, and that ups that complexity. Cost, how do I manage the cost? Where's my capacity? Do I have free capacity out there? Can I put this application on existing cluster, or do I need to go out and procure more hardware? And do I need to is there a CapEx associated with this? If I have room in a cluster, can I put the workload there? Are firewalls or VLANs available, subnets available for me to do that? All that kind of ties in with cost. And then, of course, with all these different components, how do I maintain security across all levels of the application, be it a web server, app server, be it whether it's a VM or a container-based workload? But how do I leverage the built-in security in order to provide this level of security so that I can make sure I'm compliant? And so those are kind of the challenges that are out there that we've identified. And these challenges get more complicated as you think about the changing dynamics of the data center, in the sense that today it's not just about infrastructure you own. It's about infrastructure you own, infrastructure you lease. That infrastructure can run in your data center. It can run at the edge. So now we have this problem kind of getting perpetuated because we have these infrastructure running multiple places. And when we go out to those different places, there's different architectures, different configurations, there's different tooling, there's different skill sets needed, there's different ways to provide security. Features and capabilities in terms of providing availability and security may not be available the same in all the different places. If you're running VMware in your data center, but you're running a different hypervisor public cloud, that's going to affect your ability to move things around, the different incompatible hypervisor formats. So what we really need to do is we need to take these challenges we talked about, we need to take all these different places, and we need to come up with a common foundation. And we at VMware have the VMware Cloud Foundation. And what this is this is the VMware software-defined data center that's built so that you can run it on the infrastructure you own in the data center, on the infrastructure you lease from those providers, such as VMware Cloud on AWS, as well as you can run it out to the edge. And of course, we know the VMware SDDC, hopefully you're very familiar with that, is built up of these core components of compute virtualization with vSphere, software-defined storage made up of vSAN and vVols, and software-defined networking. And then we layer on top of that a cloud management layer with the vRealize suite. And now we have this common platform that can run across the infrastructure we own, the infrastructure we lease in our data center at the edge. And we have addressed a lot of those challenges because now we're standardized, we're automated, we had that cloud-like experience, and we can take advantage of the built-in security that's part of every VMware product in terms of, microsegmentation with NSX, or deduplicate compression with VSAN, or encryption with ESXi. Whatever those capabilities are built into the products, they're exposed through this VMware Cloud Foundation. Okay, so a little bit about how we do this. So I kind of went through this high level, but we're going to get actually, when I get done with these slides, switch over to our tech zone, where I'm going to actually go into some demos and show you what this looks like in terms of user interface. But for the most part, we're going to save you time because we're going to use automation. So the automation that you use in the public cloud may be a little bit different than the automation used in the data center, but the point here is that you have the same building blocks: vSphere, vSAN, NSX, vRealize suite, running on the infrastructure you own, running on the infrastructure you lease. And now I can go in and I can use the automation in order to stand up new workloads, to expand new workloads, and to manage those workloads. So we're going to leverage the automation, whether that automation is something I'm doing from the public cloud side, or the automation is something I'm doing there in my data center. It's fully automated. In addition to providing the automation to stand it up, we're going to provide automation to go in and do ongoing day two operations, things like expanding clusters, patching and upgrading clusters, and making sure I stay on the current versions of NSX. That's all included as part of the lifecycle management. In addition, we have VR Ops, and we have the ability to go in and monitor the health and performance of our capacity. We can identify where free capacity is. We can free up that capacity. We can reuse that capacity, so we can address some of those complexity challenges. And all this is going to come together to provide this cloud-like agility where, whether it's in the public cloud or in the data center, I can go in and say, hey, here's the vSphere environment. I can make it bigger. I can make it smaller. I can apply updates. If I deploy additional clusters, it's going to be standardized. Those clusters are going to look like the other clusters, and it's going to help me address a lot of that. And again, I mentioned the VR Ops and the capacity planning and how we can go and identify that capacity. If I created an 8-node cluster and then a year later, it's only 10% utilized, maybe I make that a 4-node cluster and I take 4 hosts and I use those elsewhere. That's the cloud-like agility that's going to come through VMware Cloud Foundation. And of course, the built-in security with primarily the NSX, but the other components as well. And that's going to help address that compliance. So we seen this picture earlier where we had the line of business, we had the IT operations, and the line of business was kind of swamping us with the number of requests. And if we think about that scenario I started out with the boss coming to you saying, I want a cluster, and you have to kind of step back and think, what does that entail? Can I get that done quickly? Now think of that same scenario, or think of this situation where we've modernized our data center on VMware Cloud Foundation. And so now the lines of business are still going to come to us. We're still going to get those requests, but it's going to be a lot more organized, a lot more efficient, because again, we're leveraging that automation. So as those requests come in, the automation takes over, takes care of a lot of the routine, repetitive tasks. And the IT operations is more in a state where they can kind of be that trusted advisor. Whether you're deploying in the public cloud or on-prem, they can kind of help you make that decision, what's best for the business, and they can leverage the automation in the respective areas to fulfill that request very quickly and efficiently. So with VMware Cloud Foundation, we're really talking about bringing together the public cloud with the data center and enable this true hybrid cloud. And we do that through this thing called VMware Cloud Foundation. Okay, so quick overview. I'm going to leave the questions to the end. We may come back, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over and introduce you to something we call the VMware Tech Zone, or the VMware Cloud Foundation Tech Zone. So this is a website you can go to. You just go to core.vmware.com. And you'll see here, I have the option to log in or not. I'm not logged in right now, but if you log in, just be aware that some of the, when you log in and you create an account, there will be some additional content that may be available to logged in users that aren't available to just everybody else. So this is the, there's multiple kind of flavors of Tech Zone. I'm talking specifically about the VMware Cloud Foundation here. So you'll see there's different sections. There's a section here on VMware vSphere, a section here on VMware VSAN. So a lot of great information available at core.vmware.com. With Cloud Foundation, you'll see here, we go into that bucket here, you're gonna see there's a number of resources available to you from this one location. So you'll see here the layout of this page, and it will change over time. And if you got feedback, we welcome feedback. But you'll see here, we got featured assets where we can talk about some of the newer capabilities that we want to kind of spotlight. And things will kind of pop in and pop out in this area, depending on what's kind of the latest and greatest. But you'll see here, I have information here on about how to upgrade the management domain. So if you're not familiar with Cloud Foundation, you're not familiar with this concept of a management domain, just think of it as that vSphere environment where I'm running all my vCenter servers, my NSX managers, and my SDDC manager. And this is where I'm using, this is my management control plane for managing my private cloud. Well, we came out with 4.2 and I had to upgrade my lab from 4.1 to 4.2. So I went in and I recorded a number of demos to kind of show what that experience is like, to show how the automation is going to help me go through and do things like, for example, I'm going to go in here and perform a pre-check. So this is what we call an interactive simulation or an ISIM. This is essentially a demo format. It's a pre-recorded demo. So it kind of has a specific path through, but you can kind of see it has text here on the right that will explain to you how you would go about, you know, as you go through the demo, what each step is doing and the relevant notes about it. It has these orange boxes here on the left that will kind of help guide you through. If you wanted to use this in a less, you know, kind of prescriptive format and it's more of a free flow, you can come over here. There is this, there is this concept of, and now I screwed it up. I gotta get rid of the restart. Okay, let me just close this. Let me refresh my browser and try that again. Apologize for this. Okay, so how to perform a pre-check, come in here and, okay, so apparently this demo may not have it, but there's a present mode and a learn mode where you can go in on most of the demos. But anyways, when you go in, let's go back. And so essentially what I can do here now is I can go through and I can show how I can log into the SDDC manager here. And there's this concept of a workload domain. A workload domain is basically a vSphere, a vCenter server. That for every workload domain, there's going to be one vCenter server. Behind that workload domain, I can have one or more clusters, multiple clusters. But I go in here to the workload domain, you'll see I currently have 2. I can come over here, I can scroll and I can see that the status, whether updates are available, information about utilization. And here, if I go into the management domain, you'll see I have patches and updates are available to me. I can come in here and I can see what those updates are. And so you'll see here, I select the version, Cloud Foundation 4.2, and it shows me, hey, there's an NSXT update available for this environment. I want to apply that, but before I apply that, let's go into the pre-check. And you'll see this pre-check is going to go out and it's going to check the overall health of that workload domain. So make sure vCenter server is healthy, make sure NSX is healthy, make sure all my ESXi are healthy, the VDS is healthy. I don't have things in maintenance mode. I don't have alarms or alerts or anything that's going to get in the way of my update. So I can run this pre-check. And you'll see here everything's successful, and that's going to help instill confidence because now as I go in and apply this update, this NSX update, I at least know now that the environment passed the pre-check and I'm now ready to go in and apply that update. And so that's just a quick example there of how to do a pre-check. And then you'll see here I have a demo here that talks about applying SDDC manager updates, applying NSXT updates, applying vCenter server updates, as well as applying host updates. And that's all here under this upgrading Cloud Foundation management domain. And so if you come back, you'll see there's also videos here where you can look at videos, which are voiced over videos to kind of talk about things. So if you're kind of in that just filling it out learning mode and just want to kind of listen to somebody explain what's going on, you can look at those. Here I have this section on delivering developer-ready infrastructure. This is going to talk about how to enable vSphere with Tanzu inside of a Cloud Foundation workload domain. So if you're interested in getting started with the Kubernetes capabilities running on VMware Cloud Foundation, this is a great resource as well. We also have information here on using HCX, which is a way to migrate workloads into your Cloud Foundation. So you deploy Cloud Foundation, but you have existing vSphere environments out there. Well, how do you move those existing VMs and get those into the Cloud Foundation workload domain? There's a number of options to do that. You can just copy things over. You can use NFS and shared storage to kind of swing things. You can use cross vCenter or vMotion. In addition, we also have VMware HCX. When you purchase VMware Cloud Foundation, you get an entitlement to HCX Advanced. Depending on the editions you purchase, you want to make sure you purchase the right edition. But if you purchase those editions that include it, it includes HCX Advanced. And that's a tool that you can now use to go in and connect your legacy or your existing vSphere cluster with your new workload domain running as part of your modern hybrid, modern private cloud. And then you can basically establish what we call a service mesh and move VMs back and forth. And then you can use that to get those workloads in, but then you can then connect that HCX instance up to your public cloud and create that hybrid cloud and use it for workload mobility between the public and private cloud as well. So that's a little bit of information there on VMware HCX. And then we also have information about the vRealize Suite and the vRealize Suite integration with Cloud Foundation. So that's kind of the solution featured assets. Like I say, that may change over time, but a great resource where you can go and get more information. In addition, up here, you'll see we have a ribbon where we have information about architecture and design, about deployment, about automation, lifecycle management. And then there's also some proof of concept guides and this commander's corner, which is kind of like a blog place on the tech zone. So that's kind of the quick introduction. So let's go ahead and let's go back to revisit that scenario I talked about where the boss has come up to us, approached us and said, hey, I need you to set this, get this cluster up and running for these developers who are going to be here on Monday. And let's say, okay, well, what would this experience look like from a VMware Cloud Foundation perspective? Okay, and so for that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come down here and I'm going to go to this delivering developer ready infrastructure, just show you an example of how you can use this to help you see what that experience would look like. So we'll come down here to delivering developer ready infrastructure, and you'll see there's a number of assets here on the left, these modules. We can expand those out. We can see there's a little bit here about sizing. So a lot of times when people are getting started with Cloud Foundation, one of the questions they'll have is, hey, how do I do sizing? You know, with Cloud Foundation, the first domain we create, the management domain, is going to require we use VSAN. Now we can use other types of storage for the other workload domains, but for that first cluster, that first management domain is going to use VSAN. And a lot of times they're new to VSAN. They'll have questions about, hey, how do I do the sizing? How much space do I need? How much capacity should I plan for? What kind of growth? This is kind of just a bit of information that we'll talk about. What's considered, what you need to account for, and some information you can have there. So you can go back and review that on your own. But in addition to that, we have this step-by-step guide for deploying. So you'll see here, the step one is to create a workload domain for hosting Kubernetes. So in our scenario that I painted, we're gonna, the boss wants us to set up this environment for developers. Our developers are gonna be using Kubernetes. So I need to have a workload domain that's enabled for Kubernetes. So I can come in here, click on this demo, and we can basically see what the admin or what the IT operations is going to need to do in order to get started. So the first thing we're going to need to do is when we have a private cloud with VMware Cloud Foundation, there's this concept of a host free pool. And if we come in here to host, you'll see under unassigned host, we have hosts in our inventory that are unassigned. So very similar to the public cloud kind of model where they have a pool of capacity out there that you can then come in and purchase or lease, kind of on an on-demand basis. With this modern private cloud, we have these hosts allocated into our environment that are available for us to kind of pull on demand in order to fulfill these requests. So here we see we have a number of unassigned hosts. And so let's go ahead and let's take some of these hosts and let's create a new vSphere environment where we're going to enable Kubernetes. So I come in here to workload domains, and you'll see here I got my management domain. So right now this is kind of an empty environment. It's just got my management domain. This is my first workload domain. But I go up here and I'm going to click create workload domain. And again, we're showing that automation capability built into the VMware SDDC manager in order to do this. And right now we're going to create this just as a generic virtual infrastructure workload domain. We can choose our type of storage. So I mentioned where we have a choice between vSAN or other types of storage for these workload domains. You'll see here we can use vSAN, we can use NFS, we can use fiber channel, VMFS on fiber channel. In addition, with the latest versions of Cloud Foundation, we can also use vVols. So if you want to have a vVol enabled array and you want to enable those APIs, you can use vVols as well. So we're going to go ahead and choose vSAN, click begin. We're going to provide a name. So here we're just going to call this WLD01 for workload domain 01. give it a bit of information. There's some information about how we're going to do the patches and updates, baselines or images. That's kind of another topic for another webinar, but suffice it to say that you have a choice between using the vSphere Lifecycle Manager, that new update capability that's available in vSphere 7, or to continue to use the old baseline approach with vSphere Update Manager. And that's essentially asking you, hey, what do you want to use? Do you want to continue to use the VUM-based approach, or do you want to switch to that new VLCM approach? So we're going to go ahead and just leave it the default for this demo, and then we'll go in here, and for each workload domain, remember, it's going to create a new vCenter server and then at least one or more clusters. So we have to have at least one cluster. So we're going to go ahead and give that cluster a name. Here we're going to call it WLD01 plus 01. And we'll go ahead and click this, put in some IP addressing information. So we're going to provide the networking information based on predefined set of IPs that were defined when we deployed Cloud Foundation. We kind of created the management network, we kind of know, so we don't have to go out and request new subnets or new IP addresses as much as we've already got those kind of pre-allocated and pre-planned as part of our private cloud. In addition, we're going to deploy an NSXT fabric. So one thing to keep in mind with VMware Cloud Foundation and with a modern private cloud is that software-defined networking is a key component of that. So one of the common questions I'll always get asked is, do I have to use NSX if I'm using VMware Cloud Foundation? And the answer is yes. But it's not just do you have to use it, but you want to use it, because you're going to learn as you get more experience with it. The NSX is really going to enable a lot of that cloud-like agility that we're looking for comes through integration with NSX. And we'll hopefully have enough time, I'll be able to show you an example of how we can go in and leverage the SDC Manager to make NSX easy by doing things like creating an edge cluster. So anyways, we'll go in, we're going to provide the information needed for NSX. NSX is built off of a cluster where there's 3 nodes with a floating IP address. So we put in 4 IP addresses here, our virtual or our floating IP, and then the IP addresses with the fully qualified host names for the 3 VMs that will make up our NSX Manager instance. And then we go ahead and we set our admin password. And then we go in, and because we're using VSAN, we get to specify our default failures to tolerate for our default storage policy. We'll go with the default here of 1. So we're going to have a mirroring. If we wanted to have more copies of the data, we could go to 2. If this is a test workload, we don't want any data redundancy, we could even choose 0. And then you notice we also have the option to enable dedupe and compression. Okay. So now this is where we go in and we select the host. So remember, the hosts are available as part of that free pool. They're out there and they're available. So now I can go in here and I can select it. These are hyper-converged infrastructure or HCI hosts. These are VSAN based hosts. And so when we select these hosts, we're selecting both our CPU, our network, and our storage capacity. They become the building blocks. In other environments, if I would have chose, say, NFS or VMFS, then you would have to make sure that the storage is available and presented on those hosts outside of the SDC Manager. So there's some benefits there to using the VSAN with its tight integration, its ability to kind of dynamically allocate and create those disk groups as part of these workload domain operations like create and expand. Okay. So we do that. Now we're going to go in and select some license keys. So these license keys are preloaded into the SDC Manager. Once you've deployed it, you can go into the vSphere Web Client and continue to manage the licenses just as you normally would. And then we basically see a summary here of the object names. Note that the object names are based on the inputs we provided. So if you have a naming standard in your company and you have specific names that you want to use for the objects in the vSphere client, you can go back and you can look and say, hey, does this generated name match my standard? Or maybe I'll go back and I'll change the way I'm naming things so that I can have something that is more applicable. So excuse me. So we go in here and here we have the object names. After we review those, we're good with those. Here we have a review. This is just going to provide a summary of what's going to happen from the automation. And we click finish. And now at this point, what's going to happen is the SDC Manager is going to go out and it's going to automate all the tasks to basically stand up this new vSphere environment. And so you'll see here in the demo, it runs very quickly. In a real world environment, this would take about 90 minutes. Give or take, depending on the type of storage and how big the cluster is. It could take a little bit longer or might even go a little bit faster. But you'll see here, the way it works though is within Cloud Foundation, everything becomes a workload domain. And we can expand out the workload domain, and we can see the list of subtasks that make up that workload domain. And you can see the status here. And I can scroll through this list and see that there's probably over 70 some odd tasks here that have been automated to create this workload domain. And those tasks, we're doing those things that we talked about earlier. It's deploying the vCenter server, creating the inventory, adding the host, creating the cluster, creating a VDS and migrating the host to the VDS. It's even going to go in, because we're using VSAN, and it's going to claim the storage on those hosts, create those disk groups, create the VSAN data store. It's also going to go out and deploy NSX and configure the host for use with NSX. And again, it's all automated, all done for us. So here we are in our data center, standing up a vSphere environment in exact same way that we would go out to, say, VMware Cloud on AWS and stand up a new vSphere environment. The same type of automation is being invoked. And so from the time we go through and provide our inputs until the time we get our cluster, that process is fully automated. And now we're back and we have our VI domain. So we click on here, we can go in and see our workload domain. And we can see that it has the 3 hosts that we assigned. Those 3 hosts are part of a vSphere cluster. And I always like to go back to the vSphere web client and show it from this perspective, because this is a view that's more familiar to a lot of us. And so here you'll go in and you log into your vSphere web client. Notice that we see the management domain and our new VI domain, all from the single pane of glass. That's because when we deploy workload domains within Cloud Foundation, we have a prescriptive architecture that makes it very standardized and very repeatable and ensures that we're going to be successful. And part of that architecture is that we deploy our vCenter servers in enhanced link mode. So we have this single pane of glass. So depending on the users and how you set up your role-based access, you can either have users assigned to just manage individual clusters or individual workload domains, or you can have kind of an Uber admin role where you can manage the entire environment. So you come in here, you'll see I now have my new workload domain, and I've got it set up with my 3 ESXi hosts. Now, one question you may have is, where is the vCenter server running? Where is the NSX manager running in this environment? So we went through the wizard, we put those inputs in there to deploy those components, but where do they get deployed? Well, they got deployed up here in the management domain. And you'll see I now have my NSX WLD01, NSX WLD02, well, the WLD01, then nodes 1, 2, and 3. And remember, I had that floating. And then there's also this vCenter server. So the vCenter server, the NSX managers are going to run in that management domain, and then we're going to have our environment running down here, which is right now just an empty workload domain. So that's just a quick overview of how to create a workload domain. Here we can go in and see the VSAN data store, and we can see that the virtual distributed switch. And if we come back here, if we go out to the NSXT manager and know how we have links inside the SDC manager, will take us out to these UIs. We come in here, we can go into our NSXT. We can see that the 3 appliances are up and running, and we can go in the fabric. And what we can do inside the fabric is see that all these hosts have been configured for use with NSX. So we were able to go in and in about 90 minutes, basically create a new vSphere environment that's now ready for our developers. Okay, but now one of the things that's required when you do deploy Kubernetes is you need to go in and set up an NSXT edge cluster. Now, if I was, if we were in a live audience, I'd ask you guys to raise your hands and show me, hey, how many of you guys have set up an NSXT edge cluster? And I would guess that it's probably the minority, not the majority. But if I ask how many of you anticipate having to deploy an NSX edge cluster in the next year, I'd get a lot more hands, because NSX is definitely something that has a lot of capabilities and something we are going to need to get more comfortable with as we go forward. But there's a learning curve here. And so hopefully what I want to show you in this next demo is how you can use VMware Cloud Foundation and you can use the SDDC manager in order to help get you through that learning curve more quickly. So we come in here, and this is the second demo, and this demo is going to pick up right where the last demo left off. And that's intentional because these are linked. This is an activity where you kind of go through, do the first one, do the second one, and we want to help to walk you through those steps. And rather than have one big long demo, it's easier to kind of compartmentalize it into smaller pieces. So here we see that workload domain 01 that we just created. We see those 3 hosts that are configured as part of that cluster. And we looked at that cluster inside of our vSphere web client. So there it is. So now what we want to do, and also within NSX. Now what we want to do is we want to go in and create an NSX edge cluster. So you see here under the nodes, there's this concept of an edge transport node. Right now, I don't have any edge transport nodes. I need to create at least 2. I need to configure them as part of an edge cluster. I'm going to need to create some logical routing inside of that, a tier 0 and a tier 1 logical router, and do some setup there. So there's a little bit of work that needs to be done. Fortunately for me, I have the Cloud Foundation with the SDDC Manager. So it's as simple as coming back here to my workload domain under Actions. You'll see there's that option, Add an Edge Cluster. Go in here, click on that. It's going to list me give me a list of prerequisites. You'll read through these. We don't really have time to get into those right now, but suffice it to say, there's a little bit of networking information that we required. We recommend BGP for dynamic routing and some things like that are in there. But we'll go in here, we'll assign a name to the edge cluster, and you'll see that this ASN is part of that BGP, and we're going to assign a name for our tier 0, tier 1 logical router, and we're going to just use a default type and then put in some passwords here, password information. This is for those edge nodes that we're going to deploy that's going to make up that edge cluster. Okay, then we go in, we have 2 options here for our edge cluster, workload management or custom. If you're not familiar with this concept of workload management and you're new to vSphere 7, pretty much anywhere you're going to be working with Kubernetes, it's going to be called workload management in the vSphere client. So if I use the term vSphere with Kubernetes, vSphere with Tanzu, VCF with Tanzu, or workload management or Project Pacific, those are all references to the Kubernetes capability built into vSphere. So if you hear those terms, they get used a lot, just know they're all essentially referring to the same thing. And so here what we're seeing is in the SDDC Manager, it's asking you, is this going to be used for Kubernetes or something else? And if you choose Kubernetes, you'll notice that it grays out these options because with Kubernetes, we do require they be deployed as a large form factor in an active configuration. That's not to say you can't choose custom and go in and do a different way, but this is the default, this is the prescriptive way that's going to happen, so we'll go with that. And now we're going to go in and we need to provide details for those 2 edge nodes. And for each edge node, there's going to be a management IP address. There's going to be 2 uplinks. So we go in here, we provide the information for that management network. Then we come in here, we provide the information for the first uplink, and then the second uplink. So it's a fair bit of typing. One kind of pro tip here that I definitely recommend is before doing this, draw it out, have a diagram, have everything labeled, and know what you're going to do. And if you're part of a professional services or this is something you're going to do multiple times, you can put this into a JSON file and you can use the API to simplify this as well. So we'll go through here and we're going to repeat those steps for our second node here. This is our edge node 02. So we did edge node 01. And again, we had the management and then the 2 uplinks. All right, and so we'll go in there. We got both of those nodes in there. We can review it, and then we click next. And it's going to go through and do a validation. So there's a lot of validation goes on the SDDC Manager. We're using automation extensively. And so with that, we do a lot of checks to make sure that the environment stays healthy and remains healthy. And it's particularly as we're going through and doing operations that are going to add, expand, create, those types of things, we want to make sure that we don't run into problems where host was put in a maintenance mode or we have some type of VSAN error or something like that. These validations will help us catch that. And that way we can be sure that when we turn it over to the automation, such as we're doing right now, and we see that workflow is running, that we have a good chance for success. Okay, and you'll see here that ran very quickly. In reality though, if we come down here and we expand this out, just like the other workflow we've seen when we created the workload domain, it takes those tasks, puts them into a list, the subtask into a list that gets executed as a workflow. We come in here and we can watch this. Now notice this finished about 8:20 p.m. And if we scroll through the list, you see it started at 8:07. So just about 15-20 minutes to go in and to deploy our edge cluster. Okay, so that was using the automation. So again, kind of that cloud-like experience here. We just went in, we told it what we wanted, the automation went out and did it. But what do we have now? What just happened? Well, let's go here to our vSphere web client, and you'll see now I have this resource pool, and inside this resource pool, I have these 2 nodes. This is my edge cluster that was deployed for me by the SDDC Manager. And if I come over here to the NSX and I click refresh, here's my 2 edge nodes. They've been configured as part of an edge cluster. And if I come over here to networking, I now have a tier 0 logical router. And this tier 0 logical router is set up to do routing in and out of my workload domain. And you'll notice here that it also has BGP enabled. So here's a tier 1 gateway that's available for us as well. And so we're able to come in here and use the automation of the SDC manager to help make it easy for us to get started with NSX. And so now we've met our requirements for deploying Tanzu inside of this workload domain. We have our workload domain created, we have our edge cluster created, and we use the SDC manager and the power of the SDC manager to do that. So now we're going to go into the last step here, and that's enable Kubernetes. So how do you actually go into that workload domain now and enable Kubernetes? And again, we can just follow this same format here, just follow these demos in order, and we'll start off again with where we left off before. So here we see our workload domain, and we come in here. We can see we have our edge cluster, which has been deployed, and everything's ready to go inside of NSX with our 2 edge transport nodes. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come back here and we're going to enable Kubernetes. So to do this, we're going to go into this solutions tab where we have this enable workload management. Now remember, workload management, again, every time you see that, think Kubernetes, and we're going to deploy this. It's going to ask for, again, a set of prerequisites here. Notice the IP addressing. So, obviously we're not going to have time to get into a discussion on vSphere with Tanzu or VCF with Tanzu and how to enable Kubernetes. But if you're interested in that, we have lots of information here on TechZone, and I'm also available to help out as well. So get with your salespeople and ask them to engage with us, and we can help get you started. So we'll come down here, we'll click begin. We'll select the workload domain. Now you'll notice it has this notion of compatible or incompatible. Okay, well, what determines if a cluster is compatible or incompatible? Primarily, that's going to be whether or not you have that edge cluster created. So because we have our edge cluster created, we see our workload domain is there and ready for us. Go in, and again, we're going to do some validation. Now, you're going to notice here when this validation is over, something happens because we're pretty much done in the SDC manager at this step. Now it's going to link us out to the vSphere client. Now we're going to shift gears and we're going to go into vSphere with Tanzu, and we're going to use the vSphere web client to enable the Kubernetes. So within VCF, we use vSphere 7 and we leverage that built-in capability to vSphere 7. So we're not duplicating any functionality as much as we're using the SDC manager to guide us into that section of the vSphere client. So we'll go ahead and confirm our workload domain, and then we'll go ahead and specify our size. This is going to determine how much CPU, memory, and storage we're going to assign for the Kubernetes control plane, which is going to be implemented as 3 VMs inside of our cluster. And then we're going to provide some information for networking. There's a lot of networking related information here. Anybody who's getting started with Kubernetes will learn very quickly that you have to have a very good understanding of networking. And with NSX and with the NSX container plugin, hopefully you'll get an appreciation for just how NSX is really going to make it easy for us to manage a lot of the networking inside of Kubernetes, because again, it's all built into the automation of vSphere with the NSX container plugin. So we'll go here, we'll select our edge cluster, provide some more information. And here you'll see we have 4 sets of IP addresses. 2 of these defaulted, they're non-routable for the served pod and service siders. That's kind of Kubernetes lingo for components that run inside Kubernetes. And then anything that runs inside in Kubernetes that needs to talk out to the network, or anything outside the network needs to talk in, is going to need to have routable IP addresses. So we provide this ingress and egress range that we'll use for like NATing and for load balancing, so that we can get traffic in and out of our environment. We'll go in here, we select our storage we want to use for the different nodes. I'm going to use the default VSAN storage policy for all 3 because my lab is a little bit limited, but you have that flexibility to choose different storage policies to back the different needs depending on your requirements. And that's pretty much it. Now we're going to go in and enable the Kubernetes on our workload domain. And so this will take about 15 minutes to do, 15 to 20 minutes, depending on your environment. And again, you can monitor the progress from inside the vSphere client. So here you'll see us deploying these 3 VMs. These are the supervisor control plane VMs. And what they do is they instantiate a Kubernetes control plane on that vSphere cluster. You may hear, going forward, you may hear people at VMware, people like myself, make reference to this concept of a supervisor cluster. And essentially what that is, that's a vSphere cluster where Kubernetes has been enabled. And the reason we call it a supervisor cluster is kind of tied to the fact that you have these supervisor control plane VMs. So just kind of FYI on that. You'll see here, once it's done, come back here, and once it's done configuring, it will give you a control plane IP address, and now it's enabled. And you'll see you come into that cluster. We now have this new concept of a namespace, and we have our 3 supervisor control plane VMs, and now we're ready to go in and start managing access by creating additional namespaces. And so that's kind of the quick overview. I think we're coming up on time here, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. And do hang around, do put your questions in the chat. I'm here to help you and to address any of those concerns or questions that you may have, or help you point you to where you can get some more information. But again, this is really important. This core.vmware.com, it's a great resource where you can come. You can get a wealth of information about all things related to Cloud Foundation, private cloud, in terms of how to implement it. You know, we didn't go over this, but if you go under deployment, you'll see there's this introduction to this parameter spreadsheet. There's this concept of bring up that we do, where you can deploy and stand up the SDDC, again, using something called a Cloud Builder. So lots of information in here available to you as you get started. So with that, I'm going to switch back to the slides, and I kind of want to wrap up here with a couple questions, just kind of keep us thinking. So when we started off, you know, we've gone through a lot of information about VMware Cloud Foundation. I've shown how you can go into the tech zone and you can actually see examples of using this automation in order to stand up workloads, to enable Kubernetes, and to do those things. And so with everything I went through, think back to that situation we started out with. The boss has come to you, it's Friday afternoon. He says, hey, I need you to take some of those servers that were added to that free pool and stand up a vSphere environment where we can hand off to our developers so they can run Kubernetes. So now you can log in, you can create that workload domain about 90 minutes. You can go in, you can add that edge cluster in another 20 minutes, and then you can go and enable Kubernetes. In about 3-4 hours in an afternoon, you can basically have that environment standing and up and running. So by the time you go home on Friday, you have a cluster, a vSphere cluster out there with Kubernetes enabled that's ready for those developers when they come in on Monday. Again, treating that data center as a private cloud, bringing the cloud capabilities to the data center, and enabling that speed and agility. Okay, and so getting back to the slides here, we talked about 4 challenges faced by IT. I just want to get you thinking about what are some of those challenges? What are the things that IT are faced with? What's preventing me from being able to do what I just described today? And a lot of times, you know, that will come down to one of these 4 buckets or a combination of these 4 buckets. It's time it takes, the handoffs, the siloed nature, the reliance on tickets, the complexity. There's a lot of pieces coming together. You know, we looked at some of the complexity when we looked at how we go from vSphere to NSX back to SDDC Manager. And so you need some automation. You need to get through that. The costing and the compliance were the other 2 we talked about. How does VCF address these challenges? Through standardization. We have a standardized architecture. We use automation, and we enable that architecture to be deployed. That architecture being the software-defined data center to be deployed on infrastructure we own, be hosted in public cloud, run at the edge. So we're providing that standardized cloud platform across all the areas of the cloud, and we're using automation to make it easy to consume, easy to manage, and perform both initial day 0 as well as day 1 and day 2 activities. We're bringing that cloud operation model to the data center and to the hybrid cloud. And then of course, because it's all built on the latest vSphere components with vSphere 7, with VSAN, with NSX3, and with the vRealize Suite 8, you'll see those latest security capabilities just built into the product, so you have micro-segmentation out of the box, for example. And then how does VCF enable that true hybrid cloud vision? So, and again, I talked about this a little bit already about providing that common platform for both the infrastructure you own and the infrastructure you lease. So no matter where you're running your infrastructure, as an IT organization, you have visibility and control. You can see what's running where. You can make the decisions about what to run where based on needs of the business as opposed to other external factors. And you can do it all with the same ease and agility, and thus enabling that modern hybrid cloud. And down the road, if you need to move workloads around because it's all built on vSphere, the common hypervisor, with thing like HCX, you can do that as well. And that's going to wrap us up. So again, look forward to your questions in the chat and the Q&A, and I'll hope you have a good day.
All right, awesome presentation, Kyle. Thank you so much. We've gotten a ton of questions in from the audience so far, and we appreciate those questions. Of course, if you have a question, now's the time to get it in. We just have a few minutes left here in our window for some live questions as well. The VMware team has been rapidly answering as many questions as they can during Kyle's presentation. So, of course, we appreciate that. I think we've covered most of the questions, but let's see if there are a few questions here that we can still try to get to. First one I see here, they're asking, is VSAN required with VMware Cloud Foundation? Kyle?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, VSAN is required, but it's not the only storage that is supported, and it's only required for the what we call the management domain. So essentially, when you stand up a Cloud Foundation-based private cloud, we use automation to create that first vSphere environment that's going to host the infrastructure that's going to instantiate your private cloud. So you create this vSphere cluster where you're going to host your vCenter servers, you're going to host your NSX managers, you're going to host your SDDC manager. That is what we call the management domain. And that first cluster, it's a minimum of 4 servers. It can be more, but that first cluster does have to use VSAN. And the reason for that is because that's how the automation works. We're only able to automate the deployment of that first cluster because we have control over the storage. So we're using hyper-converged infrastructure or VSAN ready nodes and the automation to instantiate that first cluster. Once you've created that first cluster, for any subsequent clusters you may add to the management domain or any additional workload domains that you may deploy, you can use other types of storage. For example, Fiber Channel, NFS, or vVols, for examples. So it is required, but it's not required throughout the whole cloud. It's only required for that one specific cluster.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. That is interesting. And then there's a couple folks here who asked really the same question, but about NSX. Is it required with VMware Cloud Foundation?
Yes. And this is a very important point because if you look at what makes VMware Cloud Foundation something I should be looking for and something I should be implementing in my data center and leasing for my public cloud providers, as opposed to why don't I just keep using vSphere? vSphere's out there, it's meeting a lot of my needs. So kind of what's the key difference here between like a vSphere environment and a private cloud based on VMware Cloud Foundation? And one of those components, and probably one of the more significant aspects, is the way we implement software-defined networking. Within a cloud, in order to achieve the cloud-like agility and the response times and be able to do things quickly and to be able to manage your data center and the infrastructure in your data center with the same ease and speed that you can get from, say, AWS, we have to be able to do things like stand up new networks and assign IP address ranges and provide firewalling and load balancing services and routing services. We have to be able to do that quickly, and we have to be able to do that all dynamically using software-defined principles. And so that's where NSX comes in. NSX allows us to stand up those networks on demand. It allows us to secure those networks, to configure load balancers on those networks, to do DHCP and IP address management. That's all built into NSX. So a key fundamental building block and a key component in the Cloud Foundation architecture is VMware NSX. And so it is required. Every workload, the management workload domain will have its own NSX fabric, and then your compute workload domains will have a separate NSX fabric. So we do follow kind of those best practices of keeping management separate from compute. There's some flexibility there. You can set it up different ways, but that's kind of the default way we deploy as part of what we call our standard architecture. But yes, that I kind of look at it as I grew up as a vSphere admin and kind of moved into this SDDC or this private cloud world. And one of the things that was really significant between my vSphere experience and days and where I'm at now is that understanding the role and the capabilities of NSX and how important they are to enabling this cloud functionality that we're talking about.
Interesting. All right. Yeah, I love that idea. NSX is kind of the software-defined network portion of this software-defined data center, enabling that. So cool stuff. Let's see. Next question they're asking, how can I migrate my existing virtual machine workloads into Cloud Foundation on a private cloud?
Yeah, so the migration there's many different options. There's not like a right way or a wrong way to do this. The one thing that I would ask, if I go into a customer and the customer said, "Hey, I just stood up this private cloud with VMware Cloud Foundation. I have these existing clusters, vSphere 6.5, vSphere 6.7, that are hosting my mission critical, business critical workloads. How do I move those in?" You can just shut them down and copy them over. You can put them on shared storage and swing them over. So you can put them like an NFS data store that gets mounted on both clusters, and then you can just kind of do a power on, power off, a register, deregister type operation. And so for workloads where you can do it in a maintenance window and you can take the downtime, you can move things around. And it also is nice because that gives you a bit of a fail safe, because if you're copying and something goes wrong, you can always bring it up on the original place and then investigate what went wrong there. So those are very viable options. And another thing to keep in mind that a lot of people overlook is when doing that, that's also a time to upgrade your compatibility level, or what we used to call virtual machine hardware, as well as to upgrade your VMware tools and things. So it does require a reboot to kind of do that. It is an offline upgrade, but it requires downtime. But it's not to say that there's not good timing for that. So if that's an option, definitely something you can do. Now, for those workloads that have to stay running and you can't take the downtime and you need to stretch that L2 network and you need to bring them in with as little disruption as possible, that's where we get into VMware HCX. HCX is a tool. It's included when you buy Cloud Foundation Enterprise, and you basically install it and you set it up. And in that tech zone, there was a section there on using VMware HCX. You want to go get more information on how to set up this service mesh and extend those networks, and that will allow you to do live migration of these workloads with no downtime. And so that's it's. The short answer is there's many ways to move the workloads. It depends on the requirements for the workload, and HCX is one of several options. But most people, when they ask that question, are thinking about those most critical tier 1 type apps. So that's why HCX tends to be the more common answer that you'll get.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, interesting. I love that flexibility. So many different ways to move the workloads in. And then what about the minimum requirements when it comes to the servers? They're asking here, how many servers do I need to get started with Cloud Foundation?
Yeah, so the minimum number is 4. And those first 4 servers do need to be HCI servers or VSAN ready nodes. The reason for 4 is because we are using VSAN and we are implementing a private cloud. And so while VSAN requires 3 servers, we need to take into account the fact that we need to support server maintenance. We need to have a bit of the redundancy built in. To implement a private cloud and have one server fail and immediately put me into a degraded state would not be ideal for implementing a private cloud. So 4 servers is the minimum. You can start with 4 servers, and this is what we do for a lot of proof of concepts. It's what a lot of people do when they want to run at edge locations where they want to have a smaller footprint. And with that, when you deploy Cloud Foundation, the infrastructure side is going to be using maybe 10 to 20% of that CPU memory storage capacity. And then what you can do is you can use resource pools and leverage that other 80% of available capacity for hosting compute workloads. And so you can do that. But inevitably, as you start to really take this thing and scale it out, but you'll obviously get to a point where you'll want to have separate clusters to take on the different types of workloads. And for that, you'll need to branch out by creating additional workload domains or adding additional clusters to those workload domains. And for those, that happens in 3 server increments. So you're always going to bring at least 3 servers for every new cluster. So you start with 4 servers, and then you can kind of expand out and grow by adding increments of 3 servers. Typically, what ends up happening is you have your 4 to 6 node management cluster, then you have 5 or 6, 8 to 12 node compute clusters running in separate workload domains, and that's what instantiates a typical kind of private cloud.
Got it. Okay. And to clarify, Jared's asking, is that 4 servers or 4 hosts? To me, it's just 4 physical machines, right? 4 servers.
4 physical
4
servers.
VMs.
Right. It's 4 physical
Right.
servers that are configured as part of a vSphere cluster with vSphere HA and DRS and everything. It's just if you configure it, look at it, manage it just like you would from the vSphere client. But those 4 servers, they make up that first cluster, and that is going to instantiate essentially your private cloud.
Excellent. Well, we got a ton of great feedback. Folks are saying, great presentation. Where can we get more on this? We want more presentations from VMware. They learned a lot. We received, I see, over 70 comments and questions. So really great feedback on the presentation today, Kyle. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on. Before we go, though, where can folks go to learn more about VMware Cloud Foundation?
Yeah, so thanks for the feedback. The techzone.vmware.com, or if you go to core.vmware.com, that's our TechZone site. TechZone is kind of the buzzword we use for it. In there, you'll see there's a section for VMware Cloud Foundation along with VSAN and vSphere. But that's a great place to get more information. We do have resources in the VMware Hands-On Lab as well. So if you're a hands-on lab user, you can go to the hands-on lab and get access to some resources as well. That's 2 great places to get started. And then, of course, you can reach out to your sales teams and work with them if you want to go to the point where you maybe want to do a proof of concept or start looking at implementing it. The one last thing I'll say with regard to that is I'll give a little plug for something we call the VCF Lab Constructor. It's a way to basically, for those home lab users, people who have home labs, home servers, it's a way to go in and on a server that has about 192 gig of memory, be able to instantiate a full instance of the VMware Cloud Foundation running in this nested environment. So again, it's great for learning, it's great for home lab users, and it's called VLC, VCF Lab Constructor. If you just go out and do a Google search on VCF Lab Constructor, a gentleman on my team by the name of Ben Sire is the author of that, and that's a tool that we're seeing a lot of our partners, a lot of our PSO people, and a lot of our customers who have those home labs environments. They use it and they love it. So that's another great resource.
Awesome. I'm going to have to try that out myself. Sounds very cool. The VCF Lab Constructor, and of course the VMware Tech Zone as well, core.vmware.com. I'm afraid we're out of time. Kyle, thank you so much for being on the event today.
All right. Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
And thank you to everyone out there in the audience for joining us. Thank you so much for all the great questions as well. Before we go, I do want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. This is going out to Jared Osborne from Ohio. Congratulations, Jared Osborne from Ohio. And our best question prize winner as well, Justin from Texas. Congratulations. We'll reach out to both of you via email. So congratulations. And thank you, of course, to everyone out there in the audience for joining us. Don't forget about the handout tab right there. The first link on the top is the VMware Tech Zone, core.vmware.com, where you can learn more about VMware Cloud Foundation. Thanks a lot and have a great day. Bye-bye.